Top 10 Most Dangerous Countries in Africa. Today, we're diving into a topic that's as fascinating as it is serious: the 10 most dangerous countries in Africa. From political instability to safety challenges, these are the places you need to know about. Stick around, because the list might surprise you. And hey, if you enjoy content like this, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Let's get started. Africa is rich in culture and diversity and is home to some of the world's most dangerous countries. In 2024, the Global Peace Index reveals a troubling landscape, with nations like South Sudan and Somalia leading the ranks of insecurity. Countries such as the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Ethiopia continue to grapple with internal conflicts and civil unrest. With escalating violence and humanitarian crises, these nations face challenges that threaten the safety and well-being of their citizens, highlighting a critical need for attention and intervention. Now let's begin. 1. South Sudan. South Sudan is one of the most dangerous countries in Africa, with a 2024 Global Peace Index (GPI) score of 3.221. Since it started in 2013, the country's civil strife has persisted, escalating instability, violence, and economic suffering. Large portions of the nation remain insecure as a result of periodic fighting between government forces and other rebel factions, even after a peace deal was reached in 2018. One of the key drivers of danger in South Sudan is the pervasive violence tied to ethnic conflicts. Armed organizations frequently target people, which results in a significant death toll, community ruin, and relocation. Also, South Sudan lacks effective government and law enforcement, which fosters the growth of illegal operations like kidnapping, armed robbery, and people trafficking. Humanitarian crises also plague the country. Food insecurity, driven by conflict and climate-related disasters, leaves millions in dire need of assistance. The government struggles to provide basic services like healthcare and education, further destabilizing communities. Moreover, the rampant use of small arms across the country exacerbates the violence, making everyday life dangerous for civilians. In 2024, South Sudan remains a volatile nation where insecurity, corruption, and ethnic violence make survival an ongoing challenge for its citizens. 2. Democratic Republic of Congo. With a Global Peace Index (GPI) score of 3.214 in 2024, the Democratic Republic of the Congo (DRC) is still among the most dangerous nations in Africa. For millions of its people, life in the Democratic Republic of Congo is unstable due to armed war, unstable politics, and great poverty. Many rebel organizations, including the March 23rd Movement (M23) and the Allied Democratic Forces (ADF), are based in the nation. They regularly engage in deadly conflicts with government forces and target people. Because the eastern DRC is rich in natural resources like gold, diamonds, and coltan, it is especially unstable. Criminal networks and rebel groups frequently battle for control of these resources, which leads to extensive violence, violations of human rights, and forced relocation. This resource-driven conflict perpetuates instability and economic disparity across the nation. Sexual violence and human trafficking are rampant, with armed groups often using rape as a weapon of war. The country also faces ongoing humanitarian crises, with over 5 million people displaced due to violence and insecurity. Epidemics such as cholera and Ebola have further exacerbated the situation, making healthcare access critical yet insufficient. In 2024, the DRC continues to struggle with a deadly combination of armed conflict, resource exploitation, and weak governance, making it one of the most dangerous places in Africa. 3. Somalia. With a score of 3.036 on the 2024 Global Peace Index (GPI), Somalia is among the most dangerous nations. The country has been in a condition of constant instability due to decades of fighting, a lack of central government, and the continued existence of terrorist organizations like Al-Shabaab. Particularly, Al-Shabaab continues to pose a serious threat because of its repeated bombings, killings, and attacks on government targets and civilians alike, all of which erode security. Large areas of the country are difficult for the weak government to keep under control, particularly in the rural areas where extremist organizations and militias with a focus on clans operate freely. Because there is no central government, there is lawlessness and a high rate of crime. such as armed robberies, kidnappings, and piracy along Somalia's coast. Poverty and humanitarian crises also add to Somalia's dangers. Famine, exacerbated by droughts and conflict, has left millions food insecure. Healthcare and education are severely underdeveloped, and much of the population lacks access to basic services. Also, the displacement of over 2 million people due to conflict and environmental disasters contributes to worsening conditions in the country. In 2024, Somalia remains a high-risk environment where terrorism, lawlessness, and humanitarian challenges combine to make it one of the most risky places to live in Africa. 4. Sudan. Sudan is one of the most dangerous nations in Africa, with a 2024 Global Peace Index (GPI) score of 3.023. Political unrest, civil unrest, and military takeovers have all contributed to the ongoing volatility of the country. After a power struggle between the Sudanese Armed Forces (SAF) and the Rapid Support Forces (RSF) turned into a full-fledged conflict in 2023, the nation descended into even greater turmoil. Both parties in this internal conflict are accused of war crimes, including attacks on people, which have wreaked havoc on the country. Ethnic conflicts intensify the conflict and cause mass deaths, displacement, and the devastation of entire villages, especially in areas like Darfur. The violence has resulted in the displacement of almost 5 million people, many of whom have fled to neighboring countries in search of safety. The war also fuels rampant insecurity, with armed groups engaging in looting, human trafficking, and widespread violence. Sudan's fragile economy is another factor contributing to its dangerous status. The war has crippled key sectors, including agriculture and oil production, leading to severe food shortages and skyrocketing inflation. Humanitarian aid is often inaccessible due to the violence, leaving millions without essential services like healthcare and clean water. In 2024, Sudan remains gripped by a devastating conflict that has shattered the country's stability, making it one of Africa's most dangerous regions. 5. Mali. Mali is among the most dangerous nations in Africa, with a Global Peace Index (GPI) score of 2.963 in 2024, mostly as a result of ongoing military conflicts and political unrest. The country's north and center continue to be epicenters of bloodshed as Islamist insurgencies, including those affiliated with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, wreak havoc on both civilian populations and law enforcement. These organizations regularly carry out assaults, kidnappings, and bombs against both civilians and members of the armed forces. The emergence of ethnic militias has additionally exacerbated the violence, as conflicts between competing communities frequently result in mass murders and displacements. Even with the assistance of foreign troops, the Malian government finds it difficult to stay in power, especially in the country's more isolated areas. The 2021 military coup further weakened Mali's political landscape, creating a power vacuum that allowed extremist groups to expand their influence. Humanitarian crises further compound Mali's dangers. Over 2 million people have been displaced due to violence, and large portions of the population face acute food insecurity. Access to education and healthcare remains limited, particularly in conflict-affected areas, leaving citizens vulnerable to disease and malnutrition. In 2024, Mali's combination of terrorism, ethnic conflict, and political instability make it one of the most dangerous places in Africa, with little sign of improvement. 6. Central African Republic. With a 2024 Global Peace Index (GPI) score of 2.934, the Central African Republic (CAR) is still among the most dangerous nations. The country is permanently unstable due to decades of military strife, extreme poverty, and political unrest. Rival militias, many of which are founded on racial and religious differences, are the main source of fire for the continuing civil war, which broke out in 2012. These gangs regularly fight violently, killing civilians as their aim and carrying out crimes like forced relocation, sexual assault, and mass murder. Large portions of the nation are under the control of armed factions, which threatens the legitimacy of the national government. With widespread kidnapping, extortion, and illegal arms trade, crime and violence are allowed to grow in the absence of efficient law enforcement. The presence of foreign mercenaries, particularly from Russia's Wagner Group, further escalates tensions, leading to more civilian casualties and the destruction of infrastructure. CAR also suffers from severe humanitarian crises. Over half of its population relies on international aid, and around one-third have been forcibly displaced. Access to food, clean water, and medical care is limited, particularly in conflict zones, leaving millions vulnerable to starvation and disease. In 2024, the Central African Republic remains a volatile and dangerous country, where civil conflict and humanitarian disasters create a precarious environment for its people. 7. Ethiopia. Ethiopia, with a Global Peace Index (GPI) score of 2.872 in 2024, faces substantial danger due to internal strife, ethnic tensions, and governmental instability. The terrible Tigray War, which broke out in 2020 and lasted for almost 2 years, leaving millions of people displaced and resulting in tens of thousands of deaths, has left a terrible mark on the nation's recent history. Even though a ceasefire was announced in 2022, violence in northern Ethiopia is still sporadic, leaving scars from the war. Ethnic divisions are a key source of instability. There are more than 80 ethnic groups in Ethiopia, and conflicts between these groups over resources, territory, and governmental authority frequently result in bloody skirmishes. In regions like Oromia, Amhara, and Benishangul-Gumuz, ethnic-based armed groups continue to operate, engaging in attacks on civilians and security forces alike. The humanitarian situation in Ethiopia is also alarming. The conflict, combined with severe drought, has left millions in need of food aid, and healthcare services are struggling to meet the demands of the displaced population. In some areas, access to humanitarian aid is limited due to ongoing violence and insecurity. In 2024, Ethiopia remains a volatile nation where ethnic conflict, weak governance, and lingering effects of civil war create a dangerous environment for its people. 8. Burkina Faso. With an Islamist insurgency's increasing violence, Burkina Faso has become one of the most dangerous countries in Africa, with a Global Peace Index (GPI) score of 2.868 in 2024. Al-Qaeda and ISIS-affiliated groups have established strongholds in the country's north and east and frequently target civilians, law enforcement officers, and public servants. These terrorist organizations use violent methods including bombs, kidnappings, and massacres, which greatly increase the risk of daily life for residents. Large swaths of the nation are difficult for the government to keep under control, particularly in rural areas where armed groups have established strongholds. The nation is becoming even more unstable as a result of the rise in banditry brought on by this lawlessness, with armed groups targeting markets, communities, and schools. The insurgency has also crippled the country's economy, forcing over 2 million people to flee their homes, creating one of the fastest-growing displacement crises in Africa. Besides the violence, Burkina Faso faces a humanitarian crisis. Many areas are experiencing severe food insecurity due to the conflict, and access to basic services like healthcare and education is limited, particularly in regions under militant control. In 2024, Burkina Faso remains gripped by a worsening conflict, where terrorism, displacement, and poor governance contribute to its status as one of Africa's most dangerous countries. 9. Nigeria. Nigeria continues to rank among the most hazardous nations in Africa, with a Global Peace Index (GPI) score of 2.713 in 2024. This is mostly because of the intricate network of crime, ethnic conflict, and insurgency that afflicts the country. The Islamic State West Africa Province, ISWAP, a branch of the Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast, continues to intimidate both military personnel and civilians by carrying out bombs, kidnappings, and massacres. In nearly the previous 10 years, the violence has resulted in nearly 2 million people being displaced and tens of thousands of deaths. Nigeria confronts serious problems from banditry in the northwest and central areas besides the Islamist insurgency. Armed groups, often referred to as bandits, engage in mass abductions, extortion, and violent raids on villages, further destabilizing the country. The rise of these criminal networks has made travel in many parts of the country dangerous, with both rural and urban areas affected. Ethnic tensions, particularly between nomadic herders and farmers, fuel violence in the central region, known as the Middle Belt. These clashes are often over land and resources, leading to deadly conflicts. The government's struggle to control these multiple security threats, combined with high poverty levels and corruption, make Nigeria one of the most dangerous places to live in Africa in 2024. 10. Chad. Chad is among the most hazardous nations in Africa, ranking 2.699 on the Global Peace Index, GPI, in 2024 as a result of persistent internal strife, terrorism, and inadequate government. Extremist groups operating in the Lake Chad region, such as Boko Haram and militias linked to ISIS, pose a serious threat to the nation. These gangs regularly assault infrastructure, law enforcement, and people, which spreads fear and insecurity. Political unrest exacerbates Chad's internal problems. A transitional military council has been in charge of the nation since long-standing leader Idris Deby passed away in 2021, but it has encountered strong criticism and demonstrations. The lack of a fully functioning democracy and widespread corruption has further weakened the government's ability to address security issues. Intercommunal violence between nomadic herders and settled farmers is another source of danger, especially in the central and southern parts of the country. These conflicts are often sparked by competition for scarce resources, such as land and water, exacerbating the already fragile situation. Humanitarian conditions in Chad are dire, with millions of people displaced due to violence and food insecurity affecting large portions of the population. The combination of insurgency, political instability, and humanitarian crises makes Chad one of the most dangerous areas on Earth to live in 2024. Conclusion. Which is the most unsafe country in Africa? As of 2025, South Sudan is considered the most unsafe country in Africa, with a Global Peace Index, GPI, score of 3.023. The country faces ongoing violence from armed groups, political instability, and a severe humanitarian crisis. Is Africa safer than the USA? In 2025, Africa presents varying levels of safety across its nations, with several countries experiencing high levels of violence and instability. The USA, despite its challenges, generally maintains a lower crime rate and a more stable political environment. What is the poorest country in Africa? As of 2025, Burundi is often cited as the poorest country in Africa, with a gross domestic product, GDP, per capita of around $265. The nation struggles with political instability, limited access to education and healthcare, and frequent food shortages. To pave the way for a safer Africa, addressing the root causes of conflict and instability in the most dangerous countries is essential. Investing in education, promoting dialogue among ethnic groups, and strengthening governance can foster social cohesion and reduce violence. Also, increased international support for humanitarian efforts is crucial in alleviating the suffering of millions affected by conflict and poverty. Empowering local communities through economic development initiatives can provide alternatives to violence and extremism. By prioritizing peace-building and collaborative efforts, these nations can work towards a more stable and secure future for their citizens, ultimately enhancing regional safety across Africa. Thanks for watching. These countries may face challenges, but they also have incredible histories, cultures, and resilience. What are your thoughts on this list? Share them in the comments below. If you found this video informative, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to hit subscribe for more deep dives into global topics. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and see you in the next video.